Hello everybody. It is July 17th of 2025 here in the United States of America. In today's video, I just want to talk about the situation between Israel and Syria and why, despite the fact that the newly self-appointed president of Syria, al-Jawlani, despite the fact that he has made friendly overtures towards Israel and has talked about reconciling with Israel and being on friendly terms with Israel and clearly demonstrating to Israel that it is firmly separated from the Iranian sphere of influence, and that it wants nothing to do with the Iranian sphere of influence, and that it's antagonistic towards the Iranian sphere of influence. But here's the problem for al-Jawlani. Israel also has a contentious relationship with Turkey, and it absolutely in no way, shape, or form wants Turkish influence directly on its border. The Israeli government knows that al-Jawlani's government was supported, bankrolled, and supplied by the Turks. HTS was an organization funded heavily by the Turks to remain a thorn in Assad's side in the northern sections of Syria near the Turkish border. Now, al-Jawlani's offensive, nobody expected that to actually topple the Syrian government. It was much weaker than many people assumed. The Turkish government was very surprised by this, but now al-Jawlani rules Syria as its new president, and Turkey knows that it has someone now firmly in its sphere of influence right up against the Israeli border. Its Assad problem is gone, but the issue is Israel is not going to tolerate a country that is heavily influenced, funded, or under the direct control of Turkey directly on a major section of its border. Because if any conflict were to break out, it would have to defend that border. If any conflict were to break out between Israel and Turkey, then weapons, fighters, military units could flow freely down through Syria and into Israel. The Israelis know this. They will do whatever is necessary to defend their borders. Now, I'm not justifying anything. I'm not making a judgment call on Israel's foreign policy, despite my own opinions on it, but this is just the reality of it. It's in Israel's best interest to make sure that Syria stays destabilized, weak, and if it was up to them, a permanent state of civil war. It's advantageous to them. If various rebel factions are vying for control of Syria and Turkey has to funnel weapons and funding into Syria to try to back its proxies, then, well, that's money and time that Turkey has to spend in a conflict that may actually become unpopular to support in Turkey, or expensive, possibly. Now, al-Jawlani is in a very precarious position. He has to make overtures of peace with Israel. The government of Syria, the military of Syria is basically non-existent except for armed militias with technicals and some military equipment, but not much. There's no air force to speak of. Most of the tanks have been destroyed. There's no armor to speak of. It's basically just pickup trucks. I think they do have some tanks and APCs, but not much, a very negligible amount. Al-Jawlani's in a very weak position. The only thing he could really do is grovel to Israel to make sure that Israel no longer strikes him, destroys his military assets, or other important assets to the Syrian government, which Israel has targeted ever since the fall of Assad, because again, Israel does not want a strong government to rise in Syria, especially one that could be allied with Turkey. And also, too, Israel, for its own reasons and its own survival, needs to expand away from the sea. It needs to give itself breathing room. Keep in mind, Israel is up against the Mediterranean Sea with its back firmly to the coast. It's not very big. It's very hard to defend. There's not much depth or defense in depth in Israel. Israel needs to expand. It needs to become bigger. And this is its opportunity now to expand into Syria. If the Syrian government is weak and can't resist, then Israel can use its proxies in the region to expand its influence and move further into Syria, and say that if this is being done for security reasons. Also, too, if there's no sovereign Syria that exists and no government in place, then Israel can take whatever land that it wants, and, well, who can really say anything? There's no Syrian government to speak of. And Israel could claim this is being done for humanitarian reasons. But that's the gist of the situation, and that's why Israel is doing what it's doing, despite the fact that Al-Jilani has made overtures of friendship and peace with Israel for his own survival. Israel will not tolerate any kind of government allied with Turkey directly on its border. Under no circumstances will it allow that. And keep in mind, too, Israel has a certain advantage. Well, it's an advantage and a disadvantage when it comes to its foreign policy. It's its greatest strength, but also its greatest weakness. And I'm not saying strength is a positive thing, but Israel will do... The people that run Israel, the current government under Benjamin Netanyahu, are brutal realists, I would say. They have a goal. They have plans, and they will do whatever is necessary to make that goal become a reality. The ends justify the means with Israel. Civilian casualties don't matter. They'll use subterfuge, blackmail, executions, assassinations, surprise missile attacks. They don't care. There's no room for honor here. This is about survival, and this is Israel's position, and generally always has been Israel's position. But the problem with that is, because of the use of that philosophy in the war in Gaza, they have caused horrific amounts of civilian casualties and suffering. Well, this is just true. Regardless of what somebody thinks about the situation, this is objectively true. They have leveled Gaza and turned hundreds of thousands, well, they've killed tens of thousands of people and turned hundreds of thousands of more, if not well over 1 million, into refugees. And so far they have not been successful in winning this war against Hamas. But they've leveled Gaza. They've made it pretty much uninhabitable and ensured that even if the war's over, the Gazans still couldn't live there. So Israel will probably end up taking that land anyways, which is part of the cold calculation. You destroy the infrastructure, you destroy the homes, you make sure there's no place to go back to, and hopefully make the Palestinians desperate enough to want to relocate somewhere else. And that's the goal. Is that moral? Is that a good thing? I would say not, but it's their goal, and they'll do whatever is necessary to achieve it. It's just true. They'll do it for their own national security reasons. But because of this ends justify the means mentality, Israel has created quite a few enemies in the region. Many of the Arab countries that Israel desperately needed to be on friendly terms with for its own survival have become antagonistic towards Israel. I don't think they would declare war anytime soon. You're not going to see a repeat of the wars of the mid-20th century. There's always the potential, though, that, and this is in Israel's mind, that there could be some great Arab league formed against Israel. And Israel is a very, very small country with its back to the sea, heavily outnumbered by its neighbors, and its neighbors possess, at this point, generally speaking, much better militaries and much better technology than they had back then. The gap has closed a bit with the advent of Russian and Chinese technology. And this is also why Israel has nuclear weapons. It's an insurance policy, because if Arab nations ever did manage to successfully cross Israel's border, they wouldn't use nuclear weapons on every regional capital in the area. They absolutely would, because, again, Israel's first concern is its own survival, regardless of the consequences of the actions taken, civilian casualties, what have you. Their first concern is their own survival, no matter what, and they'll do whatever is necessary to ensure that survival. Again, this is why they will never allow a sovereign Syria to resurface, especially a sovereign Syria that is backed by Turkey. So what's the solution here? Well, I think the future of Syria is bleak. I don't see them being an independent and sovereign nation ever again, really. I mean, the only way they ever could be is if a completely neutral, non-allied government ever took control of Syria. But again, it's in Israel's best interest to make sure that never even happens in the first place. They're better off with a bunch of militias fighting and killing each other. And let's be honest here, the Israeli government doesn't care if Christians and minorities are being killed. Why is this a problem for them? This eliminates what they see as a threat on their border, and these aren't Israelis. and their first concern is protecting Israeli citizens and securing the future of their country. Now, this is their mindset. This is how they look at things. I'm not justifying any of it. I'm not saying I'm on their side, and that's not the point of this channel. Like, the point of this channel, and I've said it many times before, is to talk about the point of view that a nation has, why it has that point of view, or leaders, why they make the decisions they make, and the potential consequences of those decisions. And the potential consequences of Israel's, might makes right philosophy, and by whatever means necessary, is the alienation of Israel from the international community and the perpetuation of hostility against Israel in the region. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Israel's very actions invite resentment, and not just here, but across, not just in the Arab world, but across the world. Like, Israel is actually slowly losing its foothold, its political foothold in the United States now. There is a much stronger resistance towards Israel influence in the United States than there really ever has been before. To the point now where you have prominent and famous right-wing pundits like Tucker Carlson openly talking about the Israeli influence within the United States government, and how it is something that should no longer be tolerated. Like, Israel is losing its security foothold in the United States because of its actions and because of the way it conducts itself. Sure, it's what's the word for it? It's the actions it took against Hezbollah by booby-trapping beepers. Did it work beautifully? Did it cause a lot of damage to Hezbollah? Did its attacks, ruthless and merciless attacks, kill members of the leadership? Sure. Did their ruthless and attacks kill plenty of members of Hamas and their leadership? Sure. But they also killed thousands upon thousands upon thousands of civilians in the process. Sure, they accomplished their short-term goal of eliminating the leadership of Hezbollah and Hamas, but in doing so, they have turned the world firmly against them. Though, like, this is why politics still matter when you make military decisions. Like, why these actions need to be really heavily considered before they're taken. Because, again, you might win in the battlefield, but if politics, you might win in the battlefield. I'm trying to phrase this in a way that makes sense. A country might win on the battlefield, so to speak. It might achieve military victory, but if its actions bring about, say, a coalition of nations down upon it that never would have rained down upon it had it not taken those actions in the first place, and that military coalition crushes that country, then really what did they achieve in the first place? What was actually successful about that military operation if they ignored the political aspect to their actions? It didn't plan for that. Like the United States, for example, what happens when this generation of older Americans dies off and a younger generation who's much more hostile to Israel actually begins voting or holding office? What happens to AIPAC then? Have they thought about this? Have they really planned long term in regards to this? Because again, Israel needs the United States as its security guarantee in the region. It's one, what's the word for it? I don't want to say crutch, but the United States is Israel's insurance policy in the region, if you will. The threat of U.S. military force is one of the things that actually does keep anyone from directly attacking Israel, at least with ground forces. And Israel desperately needs the United States to ensure that doesn't happen, because it cannot stand on its own, even with the nuclear weapons. But anyways, that's really all I wanted to talk about in this video. Maybe just add one more thing, like what can al-Jawlani do in a situation like this? I don't really think much of anything. I don't think al-Jawlani was prepared to lead the Syrian nation. I think much of the former infrastructure from Bashar al-Assad is gone. They have to build everything from the ground up, and they don't have the resources for it. There's no army to speak of, no military. Israel will never allow Turkey or any other nation to resupply the Syrian military. It will never allow the Syrian military to be supplied with tanks and aircraft. And they're in a very, very, very weak and very tenuous position. And I think Syria will eventually be ripped apart in continuing civil war into smaller and more manageable nations. Well, at least manageable to Israel, and that's what Israel would want. I think things are very bleak politically for al-Jawlani. I don't think there's much he can do. If he ingratiates himself more with Turkey and calls on more Turkish support, then that means Israel's attacks intensify. Can't ally himself with Iran. He's already clearly stated that he's firmly against Iran. Can't really ally himself with Lebanon and Hezbollah, can he? No. His only friend in the region is Turkey, really. And Turkey really can't do much of anything at this point, unless it actually went into a direct confrontation with Israel. Then Syria would become a battlefield between the two countries. But until then, I just think doesn't really have any good options, and I do see him probably fleeing the country at some point in the next year or two, or being killed. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I will be back Saturday with another one. But until then, have a good one.